Hi, everyone. I'm Bruce Karasik, co-founder of the Jewish Republican Alliance. We're so happy to have Charlie Kirk here with us today. We'll be speaking with Charlie in just a few minutes. But first, Joe Biden picked the most liberal senator in all of Congress this week, Kamala Harris. And they get together and they do this news conference. They have this joint statement they released with their big announcement of a nationwide mask mandate. Now, Kamala Harris then looks into the camera and she says, now that is what true leadership is. And I found that really amusing because in true form, Joe Biden didn't take any questions at all from news reporters, and I've got a few questions for him that I would have asked if I was there. Here's my question. So Joe, if your mask mandate is so important, why have you not commented on the fact that all these protesters, looters, rioters, and they don't have any masks on? And if the Democrats are really serious about this, do they really want to be having fellow citizens taking videos and still photographs of other citizens who didn't wear a mask? And Joe Biden came out, he wanted to reallocate funds from the police department. So if you do that, who's going to be enforcing this mask mandate? And if rioters and looters are also not being put in prison or prosecuted in local cities, are you now going to switch by now prosecuting people for not wearing a mask? It all sounds pretty ridiculous to me, but no Joe, no Kamala. Banning plastic straws and mandatory nationwide mask mandates is not what true leadership is all about. True leadership, I'll give you an idea what true leadership is. Brokering a deal this week, as President Trump did with the United Arab Emirates, so they can recognize Israel and have full diplomatic relations with Israel. Even Thomas Friedman of the New York Times, who I never agree on with anything, talked about how this is a geopolitical earthquake and that this is exactly what the Trump administration says it was. It was something huge. Jared Kushner commented on this. He said, we basically generated an asset out of nothing, which Israel can then trade for peace with the UAE. It's peace for peace and not land for peace. To me, that is true leadership. Having the courage, as the US did this week, to confiscate Iranian oil ships headed for Venezuela, where the profits were going to be used for terrorism. That's true leadership. And President Trump just this week again demonstrated amazing leadership when he had the courage and the conviction to sign an executive order that brought mandatory unemployment benefits back to Americans when the Democrats refused to act. Now, Charlie graciously sent me a copy of his new book, The MAGA Doctrine. And here's a great quote from Charlie's book that I thought you'd all be interested in. It says, whether a human being's goal is virtue, wealth, travel to the stars, a happy family, or amazing art, it must begin by accepting personal responsibility for the outcome. Survival can sometimes be eked out by following orders or letting the experts call the shots. Greatness, on the other hand, requires liberty and the drive to make the most of yourself. That's a great quote. Thank you, Charlie, for the book. We're excited about today's show, and I want to introduce you today, fellow co-founder Mitch Silberman. Mitch, thank you.
Hello, JRA community. It's always so great when we're together. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. You all recognize this as the very beginning of our cherished First Amendment. Our brilliant and wise co-founders, our founding fathers, wanted to make sure we had freedom of religion. Today's totalitarians, however, want freedom from religion, not just for them, but for virtually all of us. If I had told you 1 year ago that you could be arrested for attending church, you would have asked me, in what country? Well, sadly, it's going on in my home state, the People's Republic of California. Ask your left of center friends some of these questions. Why is it okay to protest, loot, and vandalize, but not pray? Why is it okay to scream and yell during rallies, huddle close together without masks, but not sing in church or synagogue? How is it that Walmart is safe, but houses of worship are not? Is it really okay with you to risk being arrested for attending religious services, but not for publicly burning Bibles? Now, you don't have to be a religious person to understand what a threat this is to our republic. In New York, Mayor de Blasio went after the Orthodox Jewish community with a vengeance, yet publicly praised protesters and rioters who gathered in large numbers on behalf of that anti-Semitic group BLM. Now, I could go on and on, as there are sadly legions of examples. There is hope, though, with clergy standing up for all of our religious rights. Here in the Conejo Valley, we have true fighters in Rabbi Barkley of Temple Ner Simcha and Pastor Rob McCoy of Godspeed Calvary Chapel. Now, last Sunday, Pastor Rob was threatened with arrest, and his parishioners were threatened with legal citations for attending their own church service. One of my clients, who is a dear friend, attended the service and emailed this to me afterwards. Church was packed. Another church that is closed came over with signs and American flags and stood guard, telling us to go worship and that they would take the citations for us. There were other pastors who flew in from other states to be in support. Did not see many protesters, and if they were there, they were greatly outnumbered and there were no police. As you can tell, now more than ever, conservative activism is needed to protect Judeo-Christian values upon which our beloved country was founded. And I'll leave you with a great quote from Senator Rand Paul. We should never forget the Constitution was not written to restrain citizens' behavior. It was written to restrain the government's behavior. And oh, by the way, now that Joe Biden has picked Kamala Harris as his running mate, I think Joe might want to get a food taster. She's probably already picked out her VP. And with that, it is my privilege to introduce Charlie Kirk. Many of you already know him. He is the founder and president of Turning Point USA, the largest and fastest growing conservative youth activist organization in the country, with over 250,000 student members, 150 full-time staff, and a presence on over 1,500 high school and college campuses nationwide. Charlie is also the chairman of Students for Trump, which aims to activate 1 million new college voters on campuses in battleground states in the lead up to the 2020 presidential election. His social media reaches over 100 million people per month. And according to Axios, his is one of the top 10 most engaged Twitter handles in the world. He's also the host of the Charlie Kirk Show, which regularly ranks among the top news shows on Apple podcast charts. His latest book, which Bruce showed you, The MAGA Doctrine, The Only Ideas That Will Win the Future. Charlie, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. So hope you can hear me okay, and appreciate the opportunity to do this. Some great friends, Mitch, you're terrific, and thank you guys so much. So it's an honor to be with you, and I'll talk a little bit kind of the state of the country, how I think the presidential race is going, and then would love to just do some questions because I think that's the most fun. First of all, I know many of friends out there in kind of the participant pool. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I go to college campuses, so you don't have to. I fight for the soul of this country every single day. For those of you that have seen me speak around the Los Angeles area, you know that I have been warning against the growing anti-Americanism on our campuses for the last couple of years. Some people have accused me of being alarmist. Some people have said that I am, not correctly portraying the direction of the next generation. I think we have seen the last couple months that what happens on college campuses just does not necessarily just stay on college campuses, that it spreads, that it almost infects the entire culture. And so we are continuing our work at Turning Point Action, our political vehicle, and Turning Point USA, our nonprofit vehicle, to educate the next generation. I could tell you that there are some things I'm very optimistic about and some things I'm very, very concerned about. If we do not do some sizable changes to our country in the next couple years, our civilization will cease to exist. It's that simple. I hate to be that cut and dry about it, but a civilization has never been able to sustain itself when 60% of their population under the age of 25 thinks they live in an awful country. It's not possible. There's no logical way to be able to work yourself out of that. 60% of my generation, because most of them went to college, have been taught and convinced that America is racist, homophobic, bigoted, backwards, and an instrument of oppression. The country, unfortunately, has been rapidly embracing these ideas on the coasts, and that leads the one pressure release valve that the founding fathers gave us. The reason that we as conservatives continue to be very decent and reasonable, I think overly so at times, is we still have things called elections. It's the pressure release valve. The founding fathers designed this system for a reason, because they said there should be a civil way to be able to mitigate our differences without having to without having to get into tribal warfare, which is what the left actually wants. The left wants us to actually get into the streets. That's where they are. That's where they feel comfortable. And so there's a couple leading reasons why this has happened. I'm happy to build that out for you. But we say quite often that this is the most important election of my lifetime. Well, this might be the most important election of all lifetimes since 1860. I have not seen a time historically since the founding of our country, minus when Abraham Lincoln was elected, when really the country was deciding whether or not it wanted to exist anymore. This will be a disintegration election versus a union election. This will be an election of whether or not we as an American experiment actually want to continue. Because there is a growing voice in the opposition led by Senator Kamala Harris that want to take our country not just in a different direction. I don't think they want the country to exist in its current form. I think they want to significantly alter the United States Constitution. They do not believe in freedom of dialogue, freedom of speech. They want to continue to penalize people based on their immutable characteristics. I'm not telling you anything you guys do not know, but what I am saying is that a lot of the political tragedy that has happened, and you guys in California are living through this in a lot of different ways, is a byproduct of us losing the cultural conversation for so long. And there is an economic component as well that I'm going to talk about. But if we do not have less people going to college in the next decade, we will lose our country. And now I'm not against college. My entire organization is around organizing people on college. I'm a pro higher learner. I'm pro higher learning, I should say. I think that Socratic discourse and dialogue and different ideas is very important. I just wish college was that. I wish college was actually about creating more mature, better prepared, stronger people for the world. Instead, it's about creating bitter, arrogant, deceitful people that want to burn the entire civilization around that they have been born into. And so if we continue this industry of putting our best and brightest people endlessly into financial debt with very little job opportunities, entering a world where they've been filled with these bad ideas, our civilization has been able to withstand a lot. That is something that is very, very dangerous. There's also an economic component about this, and conservatives haven't talked about it enough. A lot of conservatives do comment on the cultural side of it. Very few do anything about it. I'm trying to do something about it. And we are reaching tens of millions of people in our videos and our podcasts. And thank you guys that listen to my podcast, and more exciting announcements around my podcast coming very, very soon. That's all I'll tell you about that. Some very fun things. But also the economic component is that conservatives don't focus on. So what do I mean by that? Well, people are wondering why the next generation, 5 million of them took to the streets and were looting and rioting and burning and terrorizing. Well, part of it, of course, is cultural. I mean, they've been filled with these awful ideas. But part of it is also the average 29-year-old in our country that is in the major US cities. They don't own anything. In fact, they have negative net worth. They have very little job opportunities, and the job opportunities they did have were completely robbed of them due to the draconian lockdown measures. That most of them are not married. They have very little meaning or responsibility in their life. And they do not see their life getting materially better year over year. Many of you watching this program right now, when you were 28 or 29, you of course had your challenges, but you at least felt like you were climbing up a ladder a little bit every year. You felt that the more you worked, the more you got back. That's not the case if you live in Seattle or Portland. It's not. It's too expensive to be able to own property, so you enter into a very expensive renting market where you're probably with other roommates. You're not building any equity, and the next thing you know, you're $90,000 in student loan debt with very little to any skills to be able to get jobs. So the New York Federal Reserve came out and they said that 46% of college graduates in the last 10 years, 46% of the graduates are employed in jobs that don't require a college degree. They don't. So the college degree was completely useless, except for the fact that we taught them to hate our country. Additionally, only 59% of kids that go to college actually graduate, 59%. So we are dealing with a small micron of people that actually end up going to college that produce anything economically useful for our country. In fact, the ones that survive end up, a lot of them, going to work at low minimum skill jobs, but they surely are able to articulate why our country is awful and horrible and terrible. And so you see all of a sudden in the streets this playing out. You have very resentful people, and I'm not saying they're justified with their resentment, but I think it's a mistake not to recognize a lot of this is economic. They are burning the world around them because they don't think if they work hard and play by the rules, their life will actually materially improve. That's a very important word, materially. We as conservatives focus on the cultural, and I think we ignore the material at our own cost. And I'm not saying one is more important than the other. I think the cultural is actually much more important. I do. But it creates almost economic nihilism. And then their parents, a lot of middle income families, when they were 28 or 29, they did see their lives improve. And they just tell their kids, well, work harder and apply yourself. That's all very important. They should. However, some of these parents themselves are trapped in stagnant middle-class jobs. They're seeing property taxes go up much quicker than their own wages. They are seeing their debt burden increase. They are seeing medical costs go through the roof. And so they actually communicate some of the economic nihilism to their kids, and their kids are living through it every single day. And additionally, we have become a country over the last 30 years that owns a lot less and rents a lot more. This is a very dangerous trend. When you do not own property, all of a sudden you have no vested interest to not burn everything around you. In 1985, the average 30-year-old was at least paying a mortgage or building equity, was able to say, I'm going to own this in the future, or I own this. The average 30-year-old, about 80% of 30-year-olds in this country are in a renting pattern of behavior. It's very dangerous. They live in vertical housing units. No one owns anything. It's the tragedy of the commons. Why not burn the civilization down around us? And we're seeing it play out. I mean, right now, and again, you won't see this in the activist media news, and a lot of conservatives don't talk about this, but I'm living through this. This is my constituency. And one of the reasons why we have been able to we've gone up during the pandemic and how many views and how many followers we have is we're talking about things that most conservatives don't realize that's happening. Did you know that we're on pace to have 500,000 less babies this year than last year? We're on verge of a population collapse. We've never experienced anything like this. It is the greatest, most severe population collapse in American history. Bloomberg.com came up with that article a week and a half ago. A lot of reasons for this. Number one, many young people can't afford to have kids. And if they're married at all, which many young people aren't, in fact, the way the trends continue right now, we are going to have more people in my generation not married than married. It's not sustainable. In fact, you can't have a civilization continue to repopulate itself at that rate. Number two, a lot of young people, when polled, say they don't want to bring kids into this world. It's such a backwards, awful place. I don't want to raise kids in this world. I don't hold that view, but I can see where people get that. You really want your kids to learn about how awful our country is? There's a lot of uncertainty right now. There's a lot of societal instability. And so while usually in times of national quarantine, the thought process would be, well, a lot of people are at home. We're going to see the birth rate go like this. It's the exact opposite, actually. And this is something that we as people that actually care about our country, the GDP is important, but I think the GDP is actually going to recover in the next couple of years. I don't know if the birth rate's going to recover. I don't. And so the way that the social psychologists say that we have to fix this is we have to go import another couple million people from across the planet. I mean, so people that don't speak our language have no idea of our history, and some actually hate our country. Like, I'm not crazy about having more people like Ilhan Omar flood into our country. And I think that we actually should have a shared history and shared value and shared language and shared culture. I think there's something very powerful about that. And so you put all this together, we as conservatives, if politically we have to win this election. I'm happy to talk about Trump's chances. I'll talk about that in a second. And Mitch, by the way, cut me off at any time, please, because I literally talk all day long. I do 2 podcasts a day. I do more podcasts than any other conservative. I talk for 6 hours a day. So you can cut me off at any time. But, and a lot of these things, I think it's really important we have a very honest discussion about. But we as conservatives, we have to stop, I think, talking about this in political terms. This election is now going to be about decent and reasonable civil society, what I call the American way of life. The American way of life are 3 basic promises. It's the first, that you should be able to get married and have kids without being financially in trouble. That's a promise that's been with us since the Pilgrims came, basically. Number 2, the American way of life is I should be able to say something politically or religiously without worrying about my physical safety or my job security. That's now at risk. 71% of young people believe that if they speak their mind, they are going to lose their job and there's going to be severe consequences and backlash. That's not America. That's some sort of dictatorship, Marxist banana republic in Central or South America. And the third component of the American way of life is you actually appreciate what has been given to us by our ancestors before us. You understand that our founding fathers were incredibly complex but heroic people. You understand that the civilization that was handed to us, this thing is a miracle, the fact that it even exists. That if you think you have the cockiness and you have a better plan to tear it all down, you're probably wrong. In fact, you're almost assuredly incorrect. And so the American way of life is now under attack. It's under attack by demagogue politicians like Senator Harris and confused individuals that are being manipulated like former Vice President Joe Biden. And they see this as their most severe power grab. I don't say this as an alarmist or as anything cataclysmic, but if President Trump doesn't win this election, I'm not sure the country will survive another decade. We will get into 10 little micro countries and there will be a national divorce. That won't be, and I'm not saying it will be physical. I actually don't think it will be. I think that you'll have the red states say they don't want to live with the blue states anymore. And the United States, as we know it, will cease to exist. We have nothing in common with each other except our shared currency. We don't. Outside of a shared currency, the country almost is more, it's not even divided, it's opposite. And I think we say, well, we're divided. We actually have grown to a place where the union idea is now being challenged. And that's not healthy and that's not good. President Trump, by winning, I think would be the greatest deflation of the left we could ever see. I think he could bring this country together. I think he could bring us back to robust economic numbers. I think he could bring confidence to young married couples that it's okay to raise children in this chaotic and dark and really insufferable world that we live in right now. None of that will happen if the opposition wins. So what does Trump have to do? I remain very worried about a couple things and very optimistic about some other things. I run a nonprofit, as I mentioned, so everything I mentioned politically here is under my 501c4 hat. I have to be very careful because as a conservative, if I misspeak, the IRS will put me in prison. Unlike to the opposition, they get hundreds of millions of dollars. So what I'm saying right now is my 501c4, just so everyone is clear. Trump has to win 4 states, and he has to be leading in those 4 states by September 5th, by September 15th, and then there's 3 states that will get him to the presidency. There's the core 4, as I call them. The core 4, before we talk about anything else, is he has to win Arizona, Iowa, Ohio, North Carolina. Those are 4 states he won last time. There is no path to the presidency without holding those 4 states. The good news is that President Trump is up in 2 of those, actually 3 of those 4 states. The state he is doing the worst in, according to those polling, interestingly enough, is all because of your friends that left your state and decided to bring their Marxist values with them, is Arizona. Arizona is actually the state out of those 4 that President Trump is doing the worst in. I think he'll actually end up winning Arizona. Our office is in Arizona. I spent a lot of time in Arizona. I think the president will win Arizona convincingly. If the president by mid-September can be polling significantly and reliably up in those 4 states, it then goes to the final 3. Out of the final 3, the president has to win 2 out of 3 of these to win the White House. Any combination, that is Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, or Florida. Now you might say, what about Michigan or Minnesota? That's fine, those could work as well. Realistically, I think you have to narrow it down to 3 states. If the president can take those 4 states off the table by mid-September, he can focus his near $500 million on just winning those 3 states and just 2 out of those 3. Now, if he can then get up in Florida polling, all of a sudden there will be a crisis in the Joe Biden campaign. At that moment, it'll be harder for Joe Biden to win the presidency than Donald Trump, because then Donald Trump has to then just win 1 out of the remaining 2, where Joe Biden has to win 2 out of 2. Therefore, Joe Biden has to win more counties than Trump, and Trump can run a national campaign in the state of Wisconsin and or the state of Pennsylvania. None of what I just said is easy. In fact, he is up against tremendous headwinds. The virus has been one of the greatest pieces of foreign interference we have ever seen in a presidential election. The Chinese Communist Party does not want to see an American that is flourishing. If Joe Biden wins, your grandkids will be speaking Mandarin, and it will not be because they want to. The American way of life will be destroyed, our union will be disintegrated, and everything that we have grown up loving in our country will disappear quicker than we could ever imagine. So Donald Trump has to win, just like Abraham Lincoln kept the Union together in 1860. Donald Trump has a similar opportunity. And so with that, I'd love to answer some questions.
Charlie, I've got a quick question for you. strategically, I completely understand what you said. This is probably the most accomplished president that I can remember in my lifetime. And he's going up against someone who seems to be incapable of knowing what he's running for, what state he's in, able to articulate a clear sentence. And yet the polls are showing either Biden winning, or maybe there's other polls that shows Trump winning, but it should be a blowout. What issue or what do you think Donald Trump has to do to get the message across, whether it's the coronavirus, whether it's other issues? What does he have to do what else could he do? He's done everything. What else can he do more?
Well, unfortunately, some of his accomplishments are no longer completely valid to be mentioning because of the virus, and a lot of those are economic, obviously. But you're right, he's done so much, and I think that when we talk about the state of Florida, which has the highest concentration of Jewish voters of any battleground state, I want to be very clear, of any battleground state, his new peace deal yesterday between the United Arab Emirates and Israel, he should get a Nobel Peace Prize for just announcing that. And he won't, of course. They gave Barack Obama a Nobel Peace Prize for giving billions of dollars to the Iranian maniacs that wanted to kill all of us. But what does he have to do? First of all, he has to remind people of the totality of his presidency: criminal justice reform, embassy in Jerusalem, Golan Heights, JCPOA, the Iran deal completely canceled, actually keeping Russia in check, holding China accountable, renegotiating NAFTA, withdrawing from the Paris Climate Accord, withdrawing from the World Trade Organization, bringing back manufacturing jobs, at its apex, the greatest economy in American history. Not to mention the killing of Soleimani and al-Baghdadi, the basic depletion of ISIS, getting actually strict about illegal immigration in our country. This is just touching the surface. Right to try, and so many other incredible landmark legislative accomplishments. However, Bruce, just to tell you, the American voters don't care about any of that right now. Unfortunately, very few people are going to vote enthusiastically because of things that the president did 2 years ago. What he has to do in this month of August, the time we have remaining, is win the COVID primary. He has to prove by September 1st, he has this thing somewhat in a governing managed position. I think he's able to talk about that better now than he was 2 weeks ago. And I think he'll be able to talk about that better in 2 weeks than he did 2 weeks prior. The president is being unfairly judged. We have never judged a presidential candidate based on how many human beings have died based on a pathogen. It's completely and totally unfair. CNN has their ticker every single day. They know this works. It is fear-mongering tactics. And the president has to do a better job of communicating and conveying how he actually did restrict travel from China, having the PPE. He wants to bring the drug manufacturing and manufacturing back to our country. Unfortunately, in battleground states, they view President Trump's reaction to the virus very unfavorably. I think that is unfair. I think that is a byproduct of the activist media, but that's how it is. The president has to convince people that he is the best to handle the virus. If that's the case, then the entire election will be about what I talked about. It'll be about the American way of life and who are we as a country. Thankfully, we have an electoral college system. Therefore, it doesn't matter how many brainless idiots in Sacramento show up and vote for Joe Biden. Instead, it will matter about how many decent, reasonable, God-fearing people in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, who tend to be center-right voters, will show up in big numbers. And if that is the case, the president will win the election. If it's about the virus, the president will lose. It's that simple. He loses a virus referendum. He wins a question on what America is.
Unless he comes up with the October surprise being the vaccine and therapeutics, then we're good.
Correct.
Charlie, just superb analysis of what's going on. I want to shift gears a little bit. You have a couple of campaigns going on that I think are just tremendously important that I'd love you to share with our audience. Whether you want to talk about the Professor Watch List or Divest You, I think this will give a lot of hope and inspiration to our community here about these two campaigns that you have going on.
Yeah, so we have two projects at Turning Point USA, a 501c3 organization, where we are the only organization to document and monitor and publicize radical professors. So 5 years ago, I was speaking at some school in California. I think it was either UCLA or UC Berkeley. And I always walk the campus before I speak. I've spoken at Stanford and Brown. I've spoken at more campuses than anyone else in conservative circles in the last decade. And so when I was on campus, I saw this sign on one of the lecture halls that was really perplexing to me. It said, "Filming not allowed." Like, that's weird. And I thought to myself when I chewed on it, I said, if these guys were such incredibly enlightened individuals, wouldn't they want everyone to film them and they could be as famous as possible? And it became a pattern where we realized that these professors really believed themselves as activist vessels to destroy Western society, that they thought it was their moral mission to make sure America no longer exists. And so when a professor gets so radical where they are basically denying the Holocaust, like Dr. Arthur Butz at Northwestern University, a leading Holocaust denier in higher education, or when someone comes out and says that Israel should be burned from the river to the sea, and all of you know the implications of that statement, and I sure do, having visited Israel multiple times. Those people deserve to be documented. They deserve to be publicized. And I'm not saying they should be shut up or fired, but I should say that every person should be made aware of what your kids are actually learning. So that's at professorwatchlist.org. Mitch, you could put that, I think, in the chat description. It's professorwatchlist.org. And the second of which is a project called divestyou.com. Divestyou.com is a program to celebrate donors who divest their hard-earned dollars from higher education to no longer fund these centers of anti-Americanism. We want to celebrate these donors. We want to celebrate these people that take their money away. We have successfully divested well over $34 million from higher education, just getting another $2 million gift divested yesterday from Stanford University. And so we're about to close another $22 million gift, and we're going to do a big press release once we surpass 50 million. Our goal is to get $1 billion divested from higher education, and we are ahead of schedule.
Charlie, I have a question. Tell us about your new book. I've read it, what the synopsis is, and why this is an important book.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a New York Times bestseller. Actually, it was on the list for a couple weeks, praise God, right? I wrote the book before the virus, and unlike most political books, it's more relevant after the virus than before the virus, because the president's, everything I talk about in the book was proven to be true. I have a whole chapter on China and how the president saw this threat coming. I have a whole chapter on immigration and his whole worldview. God willing, hopefully, coming up, we'll be speaking at the convention the week after next. And I'm going to be basically making the argument in the book that I will make publicly, which whether we like it or not, and whether it makes you a little uncomfortable about his tweets, and I can get into that, but I think it's kind of a silly argument considering the consequences of what we're dealing with. The president is the guardian of Western civilization. And if you don't know what Western civilization is, well, let me just bring you up to speed. It's only a couple 100-year experiment of these ideas that we take so for granted that we don't even acknowledge them. Freedom of speech, dialogue, individual rights, due process, be able to sue your government, democratic elections, a constitutional republic. The standard was not that before Western society. The thinkers that inspired Western civilization go all the way back to Marcus Aurelius, to John Locke, to Cicero, to Descartes, to the Enlightenment. And so, but there's always been opposition to these ideas. It's not that the Enlightenment in the West was always something that was really well held. Mind you, all of this was inspired by the Torah and inspired by the Christian Bible and the fusion of our Judeo-Christian ethic. They are completely harmonic with building Western society, that we must get our rights from God, not from government. John Locke articulated this better than anyone else. All of that is now being put in jeopardy, all of it. That beautiful gift that we have been given by these writers, philosophers, war heroes, soldiers, millions of people that sacrificed their lives. Now this one guy who's a billionaire from New York who came down an escalator, he's the guardian. Yes, get used to it. That's correct. He's the guy that now has to get reelected convincingly if you want this civilization to continue. That's the argument I make in the book. I acknowledge how unusual he is for a vessel. The least likely person you would think to be the middle-class warrior is the guy that has his own 747 jet. Fine, get over the irony and start to embrace the warrior spirit, and the bodyguard of Western society is what he is. He's a guy that we hired to protect us from the threats internationally and domestically, because he had a little chip on his shoulder and he grew up as a brawler in the streets of Brooklyn, and we kind of liked that about him. And so anyway, that's why I wrote the book.
Excellent, Charlie. We have a whole slew of questions from our audience for you. I want you to know that Tracy did put up all the links that you mentioned. Okay, so our folks can see it. So many good questions, hard to begin with. Here's an anonymous question. Do you think that the debates will actually happen? because I think Joe Biden is suffering of dementia or some kind, but his handlers are not. So I'm really curious if you think that the debate will actually take place.
So I get this question a lot. And so if I was the Biden people, I wouldn't debate. I see no political upside at all. I think they are going to be forced into doing some version of it. They're going to try to do it remotely by Zoom. And the advice I gave the president is don't accept that and send Marine One to go pick up Joe Biden to have it at the White House. Seriously. They have instant testing at the White House. It's completely sterilized. Say, Joe Biden, you've spent more time in this place than me. Let's see who should actually be here coming in January. And then all of a sudden you have a debate in person. I think that would be a brilliant power move because Joe Biden's going to try to do this hiding behind a computer, which is just not the same. It's not the same visually. It's not the same aesthetically. It's not. And it wouldn't have the same impact. Joe Biden would have answers fed to him. You could have notes scattered all over. I think that would be a complete and total mistake. I think instead they need to be in the same room together. And I think people need to see the actual contrast between their worldviews. And I think we've had in-person debates going all the way back to the founding of our republic. The idea now that we're going to have a Skype call to determine our president, I think is ridiculous. And so, yeah, if I was Biden, I wouldn't debate. But do I think there will be? I think there will be some form of it. And I'm going to be advocating for traditional debates.
We have a question from Deborah G. She says, the millennials entered the job market during the height of the recession, and now they've been socked by the pandemic. Should there be extra tax benefits given to this generation?
Well, look, this is where I get so upset with traditional Republicans. And I say to Senate Republicans, who are you actually representing? I mean, they say, well, how do we win the youth vote? I say, well, how about you make it easier to have children in our country? And I'm not all for subsidies and all this stuff, but if we're going to spend $3 trillion, which most of it was garbage and nonsense in this last stimulus bill, we had $80 million to NPR, we had $90 million to the public broadcasting service, we had $300 million to illegal immigrants and refugee resettlement. You think you'd have something to have it be easier to have young families be created? Here's a statistic for you. I mean, you know that 25% of people under the age of 30 contemplated committing suicide in the last 3 months, according to the CDC. There's such a crisis with young people. No wonder why. And I joke around when I say this, like, no wonder why the politicians want everyone to do weed right now. I mean, they want to keep the entire generation totally inactive. It's like, of course they want everyone to be like doing around nothing. This is the most abused cultural generation in the history of our country. I mean, what we are leaving my generation. Again, I'm not one to actually blame people before us. That's not what I'm doing. But let's just be honest. It's been a pretty bad deal for people of my age. I don't take that as a victim card. I try to apply myself and work hard every day. And I am evidence that you could still succeed and you could still do great things in this country. But I think that it is incomplete to just say that young people have the exact same playing field that a lot of the generations before had in the 1970s. Or 1980s, or even the early 1990s. So yeah, we absolutely should have like what they have in certain countries. I think Israel has something similar to this, where they subsidize you to have children if your family stays together. We have the opposite. We pay people to have kids if your father leaves. Like, you only get a check if your father leaves. We subsidize single motherhood.
Wow. Charlie, here's a really good question from Tina I. If President Trump wins re-election, and I hope he does, do you anticipate that Antifa and the BLM movements will escalate their attempts to burn our cities down?
Probably. And a lot of you guys, just one quick side note, a lot of you guys know John MacArthur. He just opened up his church in Los Angeles. I have the opportunity to interview him on my podcast right at the top of the hour. So I'm going to have to leave just 5 to 7 minutes early. So I apologize in advance because I have to get all my stuff set up. Yes, I think that no matter what, the violence is going to continue. Problems that are not confronted multiply. And we have seen that in our inner cities. And so we should be arresting far more people than we actually are. The unrest and the incivility is growing at a very rapid pace. And I'm very worried that we have normalized political violence and an insurrection all across America. And then yet they have the wherewithal to say that Christians can't go to church on Sunday.
Charlie, we have an anonymous question. It says, hey, Charlie, I hope you're having a great day. 2 questions. What do you think would happen to the state of Israel if Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are elected? Also, do you think President Trump deserves a Nobel Peace Prize? God bless you. Keep spreading the truth.
Yes, he deserves a Nobel Peace Prize. For those of you that follow my work, I'm probably the most outspoken individual under the age of 35 that has a significant following that actually defends Israel. And I'm an evangelical Christian. I've been to Israel twice. I understand the issue. And I defend Israel more so than, quite honestly, most American Jews do. And I think all of you guys know that to be, the case. When I just have to say, this is the Jewish Republican Alliance. When I go to college campuses, it's not the Arab kids that hate Israel the most. It's the Jewish kids that are telling me how awful Israel is. I'm like, I'm a Christian telling you how great Israel is.
Sad.
So Orwellian. It's crazy. So look, I mean, from the Obama-Biden administration, they had a pathological obsession with destroying the state of Israel. They went out of their way to try and empower the Palestinian Authority. They went out of their way to pander to the United Nations vote that happened right near the end of the Obama administration against Israel. I stand firmly with the state of Israel, and that's why I think that Iran is one of the greatest geopolitical threats to our partners. And what would they do? Day one, Joe Biden would rescind President Trump's repeal of the JCPOA, and there would be $1 billion in cash, probably on a private jet to Iran, and hundreds of billions of sanction relief. And Israel would be left to contest for itself. The Golan Heights would probably be handed back to Assad. Judea and Samaria and all the correct defensive actions that Israel takes would probably be put in jeopardy. And then Joe Biden would probably call the Emiratis and they'd say, hey, you've made an awful mistake. If you want any sort of diplomatic channel with us, you better stop what you're doing with Israel. And yeah, Joe Biden says, oh yeah, I take credit for this. That's not true. Joe Biden staffed his entire government with bitter anti-Semite, anti-Zionist individuals that quite honestly hates Jews. They hate Jews. There's really another way to put it. That's the kind of the tone and tenor of the Democrat Party. They have a spokeswoman she herself, Ilhan Omar, is one of the most bitter anti-Semites I've ever seen in American public discourse. And so this is where things are right now. And so I saw recent polling and I just say, okay, whatever. We're like 60% of Jewish voters now, 70% want Joe Biden. And I just say, oh, I don't know if that polling's accurate. You guys have probably seen similar polling, but it's just, President Trump has done more for the cause of Israel than any other president since the formation, even more than Harry Truman, even more than Richard Nixon. And those of you that know exactly how much those presidents did. I mean, you're talking about the embassy, you're talking about Golan Heights, you're talking about slashing PA funding, the Taylor Force Act, you're talking about the Iran deal. I mean, if Hillary Clinton would have won, Israel would be in a state of chaos. It'd be smaller, less land than ever before. The PA would be flush with cash. Hezbollah would be striking from northern Israel every single day. All of those adversaries of Israel are in a less advantageous position than ever before. And so I'm very worried about the state of Israel if Joe Biden wins, and you should be too.
I agree. President Trump is the most pro-Israel, pro-Jewish president in U.S. history. You know, there's a great photo of Andrew Breitbart behind you, Charlie. I was fortunate enough, he and I had cigars together before he passed away in 2012. We have a question from Dawn M. And she also noticed a picture of Andrew Breitbart. And she wants to know, how will President Trump convey all he's done to help children? I mean, he has done so much to save children. I think even the most informed people aren't even aware of all he's done for children.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's so many successes. I could do a whole hour webinar on just the successes of the Trump presidency. I think that'd probably be pretty helpful for some people, honestly, especially in the middle. But I mean, you look at just very basic things that, you know, he has empowered ICE to go after child sex traffickers more so than any other administration. What he has done on the southern border has saved innocent people from being victims of predators, of coyotes being trafficked into our country. Just more broadly, I'm very pro-life, and so that means a lot to me how President Trump is the most pro-life president in American history, and it's a very popular position, especially in the battleground states. And look, I think all of us, one thing that is really important is in the Judeo-Christian ethic is the idea of the law. The law are the wise restraints that keep men free. They actually have that scripted into the Harvard Law School. I'm sure they're going to burn that down sometime soon. But the law is only as good as those people that interpret it. I mean, if you have the law and it's just completely changing and you have people that are totally fundamental, like they're revisionists and activists at every corner, then what good is the law actually? And so the president has appointed more constitutional textual judges than any other person in modern history, let alone American history. Gorsuch and Kavanaugh have ruled correctly on all the consequential issues since they've been installed, except one, and that was Gorsuch, on a decision I completely disagreed with. Kavanaugh, despite all of the concerns about him, he has been phenomenal. John Roberts has been awful. Let's just be very honest. And so the president has also put in 200 circuit court judges. So when I say this is a generational election, I really mean it. You're talking about your kids, grandkids that are going to be living under rulings. The Ninth Circuit Court today, which used to be basically something out of St. Petersburg, St. Petersburg, former Soviet Union, of how far left the Ninth Circuit was. They today, because of the new circuit court judges put in by President Trump, ruled that a ban on any sort of magazine capacity more than 10 rounds is unconstitutional and it must be struck down immediately. This is a death blow to the Kamala Harris gun-grabbing agenda, which is something that I am extraordinarily passionate about, especially coming from the Midwest. And so the Ninth Circuit has flipped thanks to President Trump. So he's done so much for so many people, gets no credit for it, but we have to always look at things in the totality of this incredibly, let's just say, eventful presidency. Is that a fair way to put it? Eventful presidency, and how much he's done for our country.
Charlie, the Jewish Republican Alliance is fighting right alongside with you. We're uniting and energizing conservatives to take action on behalf of America and Israel. We want to partner with Turning Point USA in any way that we can. What are your thoughts about the Jewish Republican Alliance, how we've grown, and where you see us?
Well, thank you guys for having me. You guys are growing tremendously. And I think this will have to be the last question because I have to get my configuration set up. So thank you for having me. And I'd love to come back and speak at a future time. But look, people say, Charlie, what can I do? A couple things. Number one, be involved every day of every hour. Things you purchase, the people you talk to, no more non-political engagement. Your country will deteriorate if you're not an activist. It's that simple. Number two is that please shop your values and donate your values. Do not go out of your way to use corporations that have given hundreds of millions of dollars to BLM Incorporated. Don't go out of your way to do those sorts of things. And then just be persistently optimistic. I'll leave you with one story and then one call to action, that one way people can help what I am doing, if that is okay with you guys. The first thing is this. I was in Los Angeles 2 days ago at a private fundraiser up in Beverly Hills. And there was this woman wearing this MAGA hat, bright red MAGA hat. And I sat next to her and I asked her, I said, so, tell me your story. Who are you? She said, I've been a Trump supporter for 2 months. I said, wow. She said, I was a liberal who cried the day after Trump lost, who protested in the streets. I said, well, what happened? I mean, you're wearing the MAGA hat. She said, I own 3 gyms. They were all looted. Everything was stolen. I have no insurance to pay for it, and my life is over. And my people who I thought were my friends, she went to Georgetown, by the way, said on social media, oh yeah, I guess it's bad that you got caught up in a good movement. She's been left with nothing. Her life is destroyed. Nothing. None of this corporate money that is flowing to these people, none of that. And she said, there's only one person that's going to defend me, and that's President Trump. So understand that things can change. Don't persuade yourself into political monolithic thinking, that things are actually very movable. Things can break in very interesting and positive, also very negative ways, right? And those things happen based on human communication and involvement, which is why they want to shut us up so much. So on that note, I would love, if this entire Zoom call is interested, Mitch, maybe you could put a link to my podcast. If everyone would just type in Charlie Kirk Show to your podcast provider, all of you have it on your smartphones, and you hit that subscribe button. We get hundreds of thousands of people that intimately listen every day. We do 2 podcasts a day, more so than any other podcasting team. We'd be really blessed by that. But have faith and have optimism that we can win this fight, and then we will.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you very much for being here. Well, it's a battle, my friends. The JRA will, as I said, continue to unite and energize conservatives to take action on behalf of America and Israel. The JRA is going to be giving you the verbal ammunition you need to fight with us. Next week, we're going to be talking to our good friend, speaker, author, political commentator, Larry Greenfield. The following week, we'll be talking to the senior editor at Breitbart, Joe Pollack. If you want more information about the Jewish Republican Alliance, just go to our website, jewishrepublicanalliance.org, or if you'd like to become a member or make a donation of any kind, you can go to our website and it's all there for you. You can see us on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. Please subscribe to our new YouTube channel where you can see all of our Zoom videos that we're posting up there. So until we meet again, wishing you all a great weekend, a peaceful Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Bye-bye, everyone. Shabbat Shalom.
Bye.